All right. Well, thank you all for having me out here today. Again, my name is Will Bolin. As Dr. Torch said, I am the new agent in Clay County, the new Ag Extension agent in Clay County, but I'm also a producer, and that's really what I'm going to be talking to you about today is our operation that we have down there in Clay County. Some of the things that we are doing specifically around grazing and forage management. So if at any point you all have any questions, be happy to take them. But when we think about Kentucky and we think about Clay County, this is where we're at. You see the little red dot on the map here? Southeastern part of the state, definitely in the mountains. I mean, one of the great things about Kentucky is how much diversity we have geographically, geologically. I mean, all the way north to south, east to west, but we're definitely in the mountains. And that's going to be shading a whole lot of what I talk about today with our operation, how we kind of address that. But this is kind of what our little slice of heaven looks like down there. We are in some river bottoms, also have some steep hillsides. But the interesting thing about this farm and about myself specifically being on the farm is I didn't grow up on a farm. Doing it now, actually neither of my parents didn't grow up on a commercial farming operation either, but this farm that we're on has been in my mom's side of the family since about the Civil War. So it's definitely a multi-generational farm that my parents had the opportunity to purchase this piece of land in 2004 from one of my mom's cousins. So that's how we ended up on the farm. Again, we'd never done it. We'd never done any commercial farming, never done any grazing. We'd had a couple milk goats at a few times. We had some laying hens, but we'd certainly never jumped head first into a cow-calf operation, which that's what the operation was primarily when we took it over. That's what my parents started out doing, was cow-calf operation. And then after a few years, started diversifying enterprises, brought in meat goats first, and then a few years after that, brought in some sheep. Again, all along trying to take advantage of the land base that we had, of the forages that we had. And then finally, one other thing that's a little bit of a different wrinkle for us, and again, something that really does impact how we manage the farm today, is we have over the years transitioned from a straight commodity model into selling some direct marketed meats, do vegetables and such as well, but for the purpose of today, again talking about livestock and meat specifically. So now that's what we're doing, what we're managing on this farm. We do have this operation, or this piece of land, but a few years after that, in 2014, my wife and I bought another farm just a few miles up the river from my parents. And between the two farms, we have 90 acres of pasture, and that's about evenly split, 45 acres and 45 acres between river bottom and hillside. And as you all can imagine, as anybody who has managed in Kentucky has done it, the river bottom is quite a bit different management-wise from the hillsides, and we'll be touching on some of that today. So while we do have two pieces of land, we are managing them together. So the livestock are moving from farm to farm depending on what we need at any given time on that farm and what the forage resources are. And right now, again, this is a little bit of a fuzzy number, but we do have about 40 animal units on the farm in a given year. In the most recent year, finishing out 2021, that's about where we're at. Going into the winter, most of these numbers, the beef cattle, we got 13 mama cows, and we've had around 12 or so finishing cattle on the farm throughout the year that we are finishing out, again, for meat that we're selling direct by the cut. But going into the winter, we've got 35 hair sheep ewes and 25 meat goats, which if you all are familiar at all with small ruminants, you know that come about April, we'll be moving up from 60 small ruminants to hopefully somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 180 small ruminants, depending on what kind of luck we have with lambing and kidding. But that's kind of where we're at on the property. What I would like to do for the rest of the talk is just give you a little bit of an idea about how we manage this and how we kind of have all the puzzle pieces fitting together for our operation. So whenever I think about how we're managing the farm, a farm, our farm, any farm, it's like, what's the philosophy? Not just what we're going out, not just what we're going out and doing today, the chores that we all have to do, everything that has to be done to keep the wheels from falling off the bus, but kind of what are the big buckets? What is the lens that we're looking at for this? And for me, three of the top things that come up is embracing the context of where we're at. So what is that farm setting? Where are we at in the place in the world and what we're trying to do? So that's one bucket. Focusing on grazing management is a second. We'll be talking about that. And then finally, upgrading our forage base, which this is something that we've been focusing on more and more over the last several years, but it's really become a big part of our operation as we've evolved over time. So first of all, embracing our context. This picture is just from up the road from us. As you can see, East Kentucky, really steep ground. Or actually, what my dad often said in East Kentucky we have a lot of flat ground. It's just all turned up on its edge, right? So that's what we're dealing with on a lot of our pastures. We do have some river bottoms, but we also have a lot of really steep terrain, a lot of it pretty low producing, low fertility, but a lot of it is too steep to be able to get equipment over. When we were starting out, as I mentioned, starting out in the early days with just a commercial cow-calf operation, started to see pretty quick that there were a lot of things that a cow just won't eat, right? We've had several presentations today about weeds and weed management. Well, we have weeds. We still have weeds after a fashion. Had ironweed, had blackberry, multiflora rose, all the usual suspects in East Kentucky. But luckily, and again, on a lot of our hillside pastures, too steep, can't even attempt to get over them with a tractor. Certainly not with a spray rig. Some of them not even with a bush hog on some of the areas. But we did luckily find a tool that works pretty good for the weeds, and that's sheep and goats. That's why we brought them onto the farm to begin with, is to try to put some of these weeds back in their place. But as Dr. Rayburn mentioned this morning, it's only a weed if you don't have something that's taking advantage of it. For us, we were able to find these small ruminants that were actually going out and preferentially picking out some of the things that the cattle wouldn't eat. So the sheep, they've got a fair amount of dietary overlap with cattle, although the sheep are mostly focusing on forbs. So the broadleaf, what we would often call weeds, the broadleaves. Sheep focusing more on that than they do on grass, certainly. The meat goats, on the other hand, they're really focusing in on some of the brushy stuff. And we had a lot of brushy areas on the farm, and more coming all the time. Again, multiflora rose, blackberry, all that type of thing. And you can actually see this goat here has its face stuck in a multiflora rose. I mean, that's what they really like. They would much rather have that than a traditional forage that we might have for cattle. So managing all these things together and having all of our different livestock types out there really just gave us an opportunity to kind of change both the types of grazing pressure we were bringing, so both the timing and the intensity that we talk about when we're running a grazing operation. These small ruminants allows us to focus on some other forages that we wouldn't have it otherwise. And what's really cool about it is at the end of the year, again, we did get these small ruminants to address a problem, or what we saw as a problem, but we've really come to see it as a resource, because at the end of the year, you're taking off these forages that the cattle likely wouldn't eat, likely wouldn't utilize, and bringing a good price at the end of the year for selling those weeds, right? So that's a good thing. One of the other things in talking about our context on our farm is we don't have a tremendous amount of open land in East Kentucky, but the open land that we do have has typically been kept very open. So if you think about a river bottom, it's usually had all the trees taken out of it. There's no shade. We started realizing a few years ago that one of our biggest bottlenecks to production, especially on the cattle end, was shade. I mean, we just had a few spots of having to lane the cattle back to them, having to run the cattle back to those few spots to keep up animal performance and animal welfare. We realized that was an issue, and we started adding trees in. So we got really interested in silvopasture. This is actually some of our first efforts at silvopasture. It's something, again, on both farms, both my dad and I were really interested in adding this in. We've tried a bunch of different species in the past. Again, this is some of the first ones we put out, a little bit more scattered. We are going to be going into more of a what might be considered more of a traditional silvopasture on my farm starting this year. Don't have the trees in the ground yet, but they're ordered. So a little bit higher density, actually going in and planting them in rows. But for us, we really do see this as an opportunity for us to take advantage of some of these areas and increase animal productivity, we hope, according to a lot of the research that we've read. By just bringing down those temperatures and hopefully also increasing some of the cool season grass quality underneath some of these trees. Again, we're just very early in it right now. These trees are about 7 years old. They are cottonwoods, these trees specifically, and they've made about 70 feet of growth in the last 7 years, which is pretty impressive and starting to get us to where we want to be. But that's just something else we're doing. Kind of the bread and butter of what we think about is grazing management on the farm. That's really, whenever I think about what we're doing as an operation, that's where my mind immediately goes, is how we can improve our grazing. As I mentioned, we've got 90 acres. 45 acres of that is pretty good, easy ground to get on, but for us, and we don't have a lot of opportunity to add additional land into it, just given where we're at and kind of the unique area where we're at. So for us, what we try to do is think about how can we manage this better? How can we use grazing management more intensively, better, to try to get as much bang for the buck as we can out of our available land base. So of course it does take infrastructure to do that. For us, this is actually an aerial view of my dad's farm, but each of the little blue areas on there, you see the legend down here, but the blue areas are different water sources, whether that's a pond that we're actually piping water out of to the tanks and the hydrants, and all the black lines are fences. Now, almost every fence on both operations or on both pieces of property are high-tensile electric fence. We're really, really big fans of that fencing system. Most of what we have on both farms has been built new by us since we moved down there, since we've moved on to the farms. But for us, we've really found that the high-tensile electric pretty affordable. It goes up relatively fast. We like the flexibility with our terrain, but one additional thing that we really like about it is since it is electrified, we can pull off of it, and each of these permanent paddocks gives us the ability to split them up further. So we have quite a few of the reels. That's one thing that we are big fans of, is using poly wire on a good high quality reel and the step-in post to further subdivide these pastures. And again, it's one of those things, I know oftentimes I've had people ask, well, what kind of rotation are you on? How often do you move them? I mean, it's really one of those things where it's depending on what we're trying to accomplish at that time, what class, what size of animal we might have in that pasture at that time, and what we're trying to do with it. I mean, in some places we might really be trying to hold off the forages. In other places, especially if we're going into more of a brushy area with the goats, for instance, we might really be trying to hit it. and trying to bring it back into more of a traditional forage production. But the thing about it is it gives us the flexibility to go in, manage a place with grazing, and then pull back off of it. It's rotational grazing system all the way around and providing that rest. So we really want to be able to provide the rest that we need to the forages for whatever our management goal is at that time. So again, using the rotational grazing, we can get in pretty tight. This is actually with some annuals that we had out a few years ago, some sorghum Sudan grass. But it allows us to get in, accomplish what we need. We feel like we are getting a lot better distribution of manure and urine across the property, which is important to us for a few different reasons, but we are a relatively low input operation. So we try not to purchase a lot of commercial fertilizer. We feel like it's often pencils out better for us not to do that, although there's certainly a time and a place for it. So for us, if we can use this rotational grazing to manage the forage and then also manage the manure and urine distribution across the property, we feel like it pencils out better for us in the end by doing that. And just touching on the last little bit of grazing management in this section is we're really big fans of stockpiled fescue. Stockpiled tile fescue is good. This is a picture I took last night. As you can see, the grazing sticks down in there. This is actually a pasture that we did go in and put some commercial fertilizer on it back in the late summer. I mean, it's an incredibly thick sward now. That grazing stick, I didn't push it in the ground. It's not leaning up against anything. It's just standing up. Was just able to stick it down in there and have it standing there. As you can see, we have about 20 inches of real good, tall, thick, tall fescue in that pasture that we will be turning on to as we get a little bit closer into the winter as we prepare for that. Now, for us, we are trying to minimize stored feed use as much as possible. Right now, last year or two, I think we have fed around 75 days of hay feeding. In the past, we've had it down as low as 55 days of hay feeding over a winter. And there's a reason for that that we're about to get into. But really, this stockpiled tile fescue, we really love using this system. We feel like it really helps us keep costs down through the winter. But one reason that we are feeding a little bit more hay right now at our given stocking rate is we have been upgrading our forage base on the river bottom pastures. Now, we had mentioned earlier today about thinking about where we might want to apply fertilizer if we're thinking about putting fertilizer in the pasture, where we might think about intensifying that management. That's what we're doing right now on the river bottoms. We are moving into improved forages across most of our across all of our river bottoms. We just haven't got there yet. We started in 2016. But this shot right here is with that given. So before I go anywhere else, I would like to say there is an opportunity cost. I get it. I mean, we're producers. It's great to have improved forages out there, but there's definitely an opportunity cost. And I mean, the opportunity cost is bigger than the economic, than the money out of pocket. When I talk to a lot of other producers, it's not so much that they hate to spend the $4 a pound on the seed and everything like that. It's that they're scared of taking that pasture out of production during the time that they're transitioning over. So completely get there's an opportunity cost. But for our situation with maintaining high quality forages to be able to finish grass-fed beef on it, we felt like it made sense for us. This is a picture, actually just took it last night. But you can see the lighter green grass, kind of a weird color on the slide here for whatever reason, but the lighter green grass in the foreground is a novel endophyte fescue. Last year was and then back behind it is the regular plain old Kentucky 31 fescue that's been there since they quit raising tobacco on the property before we took ownership. But for us, we're really trying to bring that forage base up, as I mentioned. That is the opportunity cost. This is why we're not killing everything out at one time, just because over the last several years we have been moving a lot over, and we only have so much that we can't use at any given time. We started putting in the novel endophyte tile fescue last year, so this is the first year that we've had any grazing. We are adding more in this year, and we'll be adding in more next year as well. We've used several different methodologies for actually getting that in the ground. I mean, we are no-tilling everything, so going in and terminating the previous perennial pasture that's already there. But we've done everything from this pasture was simply sprayed and then planted all the way through the one of the first ones that we did. We hit it several times. So we sprayed it, put wheat in it as a smother crop, sprayed it the next spring, put in sorghum sudan grass as a smother crop, and then terminated that and then planted the novel endophyte fescue into that. So those are kind of two extremes. Honestly, I don't know. We might have just been lucky. Again, we've only done this on 3 different paddocks at this point across several acres, but so far I haven't seen a real big difference for us on our operation yet between, again, putting it in annuals for a couple rotations and spraying in between versus going straight out of perennial pasture, spraying and then putting in the endophyte free or the novel endophyte fescue. So as we keep doing this, we might get more of an opinion on that, but so far to date, we've not seen much of a difference in establishment and in how well it's doing. And this is actually our first foray into putting in some improved pastures. This is native warm season grasses. This is the first thing we did. We started this project in 2016 and have added in a couple other areas since then. But we knew we were wanting something for summertime forages. We looked at several different things. We looked at annuals. Again, we are finishing animals out. We looked at annuals. But at the end of the day, when we started just running the numbers on it and penciling it out, with us being as small as we are and kind of where we're located in the world, I mean, it takes us almost an hour to get to the farm store where we can buy seed at. We do have access, thankfully, to shared use equipment that we can go and get for a sprayer, no-till drill and such. But again, it's 30 minutes each way to that, and then you got to see what the settings were, recalibrate everything, but then go through it and check everything from the last person that used it that probably wasn't in the same soil type as you are. So all that, with us, we decided that annuals just didn't make sense, that we really wanted to build our operation around a perennial forage base. So we went to the native warm season grasses and put in a mix of Indian grass and big blue stem, and it's worked great. It was, I will say, a lot more nerve-wracking to establish that grass than it was the tile fescue, the novel endophyte fescue that we've been putting in. Took a lot longer for it to, quite a bit longer for it to get up and running. But after it has, we're really, really pleased with it. And I think more than anything else that we've done, or as much as anything else that we've done, it's really, really helped us manage our grazing throughout the year and helped us start to, well, what it has done is taken the pressure off of our cool season grasses through the summer. So, I mean, as I'm sure everybody sitting in this room right now knows, we have a summer slump where cool season grasses slow down. What we had always done before, the same thing that most folks in Kentucky do that I've talked to, we always just went out, kept grazing our cool season pastures, tried not to beat them up too bad, but we had about a 3-month stretch there where we were just beating our cool season pastures up, especially if the rain turned off and we weren't getting a lot of clover coming in or some crabgrass coming in or something like that. I mean, we were really beating them up without intending to. But as soon as we had something out on the ground that comes in every year. I mean, we typically turn in first week or two of June and are able to turn in on a really, really high quality forage, something that provides just excellent daily gains, especially for the first 45 to 60 days that we're grazing it. And it comes in every year. So by doing that, that's allowed us to take the pressure off of our cool season pastures for about a 3-month stretch, which has been really good. We are still kind of learning how to manage the native warm seasons. To be honest, again, we've put them in 2016. Didn't really start grazing them real good until 2018, 2019. Have a few years under our belt. But so far we're really, really pleased with them, and the amount of growth that you get off of them is pretty phenomenal. So again, it's a high quality forage, but it also grows really, really fast. So we have put in another additional 4 acres. It's a little bit off the farm this year that we cut for hay. The interesting thing to us, we went out and cut it mid June. I went out and measured it. Again, it was an Indian grass, big blue stem mix. That forage was about 32 inches tall when we cut it. So maybe up a little bit higher than what you want, but about 32 inches high when we cut it. We had a boot on the disc mower, cut it down to about 9 inches. I came back, measured it a week later, it was back to 18 inches. Doubled in size in a week's time. 2 weeks later, we were at 23 inches, and 3 weeks later, we were back to 32 inches again. So the recovery on it is that fast. And again, for us, we are making some hay off some of it, but for us, we really see it as being an excellent forage, particularly for the cattle. Small ruminants, not so much. It's a little bit too big for them. The sheep and the goats would rather be eating the broadleafs and the brars that are coming in that time of the year. But just in closing, we've heard this several times today. There's no reason for me to belabor the point necessarily. But as all of us in this room who are grazing animals, who are managing forage, we're really just managing sunlight and moisture. We'll oftentimes say that we're managing sunshine and raindrops. That's what we're doing. We're collecting that solar energy. We're turning that into a forage that we're then able to run through an animal. That's really our job as farmers, is to figure out how we can do that to the best of our ability on our given operations. That's how we're doing it at Old Home Place Farm in Clay County. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions if we have a few minutes.
Got a few minutes for questions.
Yes, sir. Yeah, questions about bush honeysuckle. We don't yet. I am seeing it pop up. We've never had it. I am seeing it pop up alongside the road in a few places, and I did find 2 on my farm last year that we cut out. But we've got a lot of invasives, but that's not one of them that we've had to contend with yet.
Where were you marketing your feed?
Yeah, so marketing, we are selling, we have an online farm store. We also do a meat CSA. We're in Clay County, and we're selling in 5 counties around us right now. So doing weekly deliveries. We're not shipping. We're doing weekly deliveries. Williamsburg, Corbin, London, Manchester, Oneida, Hazard, and Hyden.
Do you have any problem getting rid of your product?
No, we haven't seemed to yet. I mean, it's always one of those things where it's a give and a take about having to forecast production and how much we're going to need several months in advance growing an animal, of course. But to date, we've been able to do it pretty good. And I mean, we are, whenever we're picking everything back up from the processor, we're picking it up as frozen. So we are do have enough storage on the farm that we're able to hold it through the lean periods and be able to hold it off and kind of keep the supply going that way.
What do you do about the coyotes?
You know, we've not had much of a problem. So the question was about coyotes, predators, I assume with the small ruminants. We haven't had much problem with that traditionally. We have always had a livestock guardian dog up until maybe the last year and a half. The dog we had died, and we just haven't replaced that guardian dog yet. So what we are doing, or what we have been doing in the interim, is bringing them in at night. So most of the places on our property are relatively close to a secure corral. And the only grain that we are using on the farm, we'll have probably 2 pounds a day that we're giving to the entire sheep and goat herd, just enough to essentially rattle a bucket, and they'll come and follow you in. They'll follow anywhere on a farm if you're able to do that. Yeah, they respect the electric fence. We've never had any issue with them getting out at all, really. No, in the springtime, some of the kids and lambs might get out, but it's not something that we never stress about it anymore, because their mothers can't get out and they always go back to them. So, yes, sir. Yeah, yep. And we do have some on our farm actually, kudzu. Oh, they do good off of it. Yeah, it's actually really good forage, and if you have access to it, I hear it grows fast. So. Yeah, so processing the beef right now, we're mostly using Appalachian meats right now in Prestonsburg. We've used several different ones over the years. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody real close to us. I know that has been a bottleneck, especially for USDA inspected processors in Kentucky. It's better now than it was 12, 14 years ago when we first started selling by the cut. We definitely have more options now. But yeah, it's still, that's one of our bigger challenges. Is we are, every time that we're taking animals to the processor, it's right at 100 miles each way. So we are definitely putting some miles on the truck, getting animals into the processor, and then going and getting the meat back. Yes, sir. Yep, so the question was about untapped opportunities for grazing operations in the Cumberland Plateau. Two things immediately come to mind. So for the first one, we have a lot of ground out there right now that a lot of it would have been in tobacco 20 or 25 years ago. A lot of it now is either being bush hogged, maybe being cut for hay. A lot of it's just starting to grow up. So there's definitely that, especially in some of our bigger river drainages. Now that said, even with that, it's a relatively small amount. It's something that a local producer could definitely tap into, I think, but it's not going to be something you're going to scale huge. Kind of the other side of that, the flip side of that coin in terms of something bigger, there is a tremendous amount of reclaimed surface mine in southeast Kentucky, which is interesting from a couple different standpoints. A large portion of that property, it's been reclaimed over the last 45, 50 years, has been reclaimed as hay and pasture land use. But the soils are really compacted. A lot of times the forages have moved over to Sericea lespedeza and things of that nature. So there are definitely challenges with it, but by the same token, last stats I seen, we had probably close to 1 million acres of grass in East Kentucky on strip jobs, most of which isn't being utilized. There's definitely some of it is being used, but I've seen more not being used for an agricultural purpose than being used for an agricultural purpose.
One more question for Will. All right, let's thank Will for that presentation.